Hi there folks, absolutely great to see you. It's a great autumnal day up here at the church building. It's our last day of Nehemiah today.
Today's reading comes from Nehemiah chapter 12, verses 27 to 30, and then verse 43. Dedication of the Wall of Jerusalem. At the dedication of the Wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The musicians also were brought together from the region around Jerusalem, from the villages of the Netophathites, from Beth Gilgal, and from the area of Jeba and Asmapheth. For the musicians had built villages for themselves around Jerusalem. When the priests and Levites had purified themselves ceremonially, they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. And then verse 43. And on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away.
Well, yes, today is the last day when we're going to be looking at the book of Nehemiah together. And so as we try and wrap up everything that we've learned from Nehemiah, this wonderful story, we're going to try and think of what it means for us in terms of our life with God and an ongoing relationship with Him, because it is all about relationship. And the picture that's painted in Nehemiah is like our life with God. We think of the amazing things that were managed to be achieved here. We had Nehemiah and the people rebuilding the walls, repairing them, providing safety and security and stability, then making sure there was life inside and worship as well, as they celebrated everything the Lord had done for them with joy. Well, that's a picture of our life with God as well, isn't it? God makes us whole again. He renews us and repairs us. He rebuilds our life. He gives us life within because of Jesus. We know a peace inside that transcends all understanding because of Him. He builds us up and He gives us security and stability and life and joy, and worship pours out from within us towards God because of the great God that we have. And it is about an ongoing relationship. God longs to be in relationship with us. In Hosea, another Old Testament book, in chapter 11, it says this: "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. They sacrificed to the Baals and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. I lifted the yoke from their neck and bent down to feed them." Then it says, "How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I treat you like Admah? How can I make you like Zeboim? My heart is changed within me. All my compassion is aroused." And the people, as they thought about God back in Nehemiah's time, they realized that they had a God of covenant love. They gave Him praise and they prayed to Him. They said in chapter 9, verse 32, as they prayed towards Him, "Now therefore, O our God, the great, mighty and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love. This is a God who has entered into a covenantal relationship with us. He is committed to us, and it's a relationship of love. And so when the people realize how committed God is to them, and he's committed to each one of us, he loves each one of us, the people back in Nehemiah's day, they decide to make a commitment back to God. It says this in chapter 9, verse 38, in view of all this, we are making a binding agreement, putting it in writing, and our leaders, our Levites, and our priests are affixing their seals to it. They decide to commit themselves to God in view of everything that God has done for us. They say, we're going to give our all back towards God. And at the end of the day, each one of us has to make that commitment for an ongoing relationship with God, realizing everything that God has done for us, his love, his blessings, his life, the joy that we have within us because of him. We then commit ourselves towards God in relationship. And so they make this commitment. This is what the people do here. They make a commitment. Each one of us has to make a commitment and make a decision to commit to God. Well, what kind of commitment was it? Well, it was a commitment to relationship. They say, we are going to do things here out of our relationship with God. We're going to love God and worship God, honor God with our life. It's going to affect how we treat other people round about us, our families, our community, other peoples as well, the earth and creation. Everything's changed because of what God has done for us. And therefore, this is an ongoing committed relationship we're going to have with God. And it's going to affect everything they say. They say we're going to bring to the house each year the first fruits of our crops and of every fruit tree. They say we will not neglect the house of our God. They realize that it is an ongoing relationship as they make this commitment. I wonder if you could say you have a relationship, a committed relationship with God. He's certainly committed to you. Can you say you're committed to him in a relationship of love? Do you have that in your heart towards him? So they committed to a relationship with God. They also decided to commit to holiness as well. It says in chapter 10, they talk about, and all who separated themselves. Holy is one of those words, isn't it? What does it really mean? I guess it means being distinct, set apart, special, set aside for a particular purpose. And certainly in relation to God, it means being set apart for him, dedicated to him and for his purposes, and living in a way that makes us distinctive for him as well. We're holy in a sense because of what God has done in our life and because of how then we respond towards God. In chapter 11, when he talked about settling in Jerusalem, we talked about those who were going to live in Jerusalem. It was described as the holy city. They wanted this to be a holy place, special, distinctive, different. We're to be that as well for God in this ongoing relationship that we have with him. Well, what else? Well, costliness and sacrifice was there too. They talk about bringing to the house of the Lord each year the first fruits of our crops and of every fruit tree as well. We will bring to the storerooms of the house of our God, to the priests, the first of our ground meal, of our grain offerings, of the fruit of all our trees, and of our new wine and oil, and we will bring a tithe of our crops to the Levites. As we've thought before, they say, we will not neglect the house of our God. It meant something to them, it cost something, and all relationships cost something to us when we love the other. We do it willingly, lovingly, in terms of a sacrifice for folks we love. God has done that for us. We know that God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son for us, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God has given so much for us. We are to give back to God. And the people here realized that an ongoing relationship with God meant something. In fact, they came to realize that at the end of the day, it means everything. So the people here realized that they were to be committed to God in terms of an ongoing relationship. And they made that commitment And here's another thing that we read about in Nehemiah, that it involves a dedication of our life to God when we realize how much He's done for us and the response we're to make towards Him. It's about dedicating our lives to Him and His purposes, His ways, His love, His grace, His mercy, and to His kingdom. And then to take part in the furthering of that in the world by being a loving person towards others, as a likeness of God towards others. And now that we've seen what God is like in Jesus, being a likeness of Jesus in the world and walking as Jesus walked, living as Jesus lived, loving as Jesus loved. And so they dedicated themselves to God. They said, I am going to live my life for you. They realized they might get it wrong. God would never let them down. And even if they lacked faith, God would never be unfaithful to them. They may let God down, and God would always be faithful to them, but relying on His grace, His strength, His mercy, they were going to dedicate themselves as best as they were able to live for God and for His glory and His ways in this world. And so they decided to dedicate themselves. They put it in writing, they set it down, they said, we are going to do this. You know, you're maybe a person who has never truly done that in their life. You've never truly dedicated your life to God. The thing about this dedication is that it grounded their commitment. It made it real. It went beyond a feeling or a vague intention or something they might do in the future. No, it grounded it, and they made that dedication. They dedicated their life there and then to God. And maybe you need to do that, maybe for the very first time. And it might involve you repenting, turning your back on your old way of life. It might involve a complete change of heart or a complete change of mind. It might just even be the realization of the immensity of God's love for you and how you're to live with love towards God and towards others in a likeness of Him. Make that dedication today in your own life. Decide to commit to God and to live for Him and Him alone and for His glory. Or maybe you've made a dedication like that in the past, but you're still to dedicate and hand over everything to God in your life. And maybe now there's something in your life, a situation, a problem, a worry, a burden, maybe even your own hopes and dreams and plans, and you're to hand over everything to God, everything about you to be given over to God for His glory. And maybe the call is upon you today to make that kind of dedication to God as well. That's the kind of thing that the people did here. Everything about them was handed over to God. And you know, that even included the walls that they'd been building. You could think that actually after building these walls, they could take pride in them. They could put their security in the walls. Their peace was grounded in the walls and founded in them. But no, actually, even the walls that had cost them blood, sweat and tears, they handed them over to God as well. And so we read in chapter 12, the second last chapter of Nehemiah, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps and lyres. The singers also were brought together from the region around Jerusalem. And then we're told that when the priests and Levites had purified themselves ceremonially, they purified the people, the gates and the wall as part of this dedication. And there were choirs involved. One half went round one way, another lot went round another way. They joined together. And then we're told in verse 43, and on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away. Lots of rejoicing. Paul says in Philippians, rejoice, and I will say it again, rejoice. It's because they were handing everything over to God, and it was so freeing for them. And they celebrated who God was and the fact they were giving everything over to Him. We need to do that as well. And when we do that, we too will know great joy in our life. So Nehemiah and the people, they realised that an ongoing life with God is needed. It's an ongoing life about relationship and commitment and dedication, knowing that sometimes we'll get it wrong, but we rely on God's grace and His mercy, and we live for Him, knowing that He'll always stay true to us. Well, we get to the very last chapter of Nehemiah, chapter 13, and we read this. But while all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. And then sometimes later I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. So that's interesting. So while certain things were going on towards the end of the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah wasn't there. He was back in Persia. Remember, he was cupbearer to the king of Persia. Well, it shouldn't surprise us, because if we can remember way back, and it's easy to miss a detail like this, in chapter 2 in verse 6, when Nehemiah first asked the king if he could go to Jerusalem and see what the walls were like for himself and get help to rebuild them. So then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. The king wanted Nehemiah back. Nehemiah set a time for the king, and he was true to his word. He stuck to that, and he obviously went back to the king of Persia and left folks behind in Jerusalem. But while he was away, certain things were going on, and unfortunately, they were not good things. So what was happening? He says, while all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. Well, while the cat was away, what was going on? Well, we read this. Before this, Eliashib, the priest, had been put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. He was closely associated with Tobiah. Now, we've heard Tobiah's name before, because he was not good, and in fact had actively opposed the people in their endeavours to build the wall. But unfortunately, Tobiah had been provided with a large room formerly used to store the grain offerings and incense and temple articles, and also the tithes of grain, new wine and oil prescribed for the Levites, singers and gatekeepers, as well as the contribution for the priests. So where things were to be stored for the house of God and for the people of God, for the worship of God to go on, here was someone effectively setting up house in there and pushed all the other things aside. Well, needless to say, Nehemiah was not happy with this. We read in verse 8, I was greatly displeased, he said, and threw all Tobiah's household goods out of the room. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God with the grain offerings and the incense. And then he says, I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, and that all the Levites and singers responsible for the service had gone back to their own fields. So I rebuked the officials and asked them, why is the house of God neglected? Remember, they'd all said, we will not neglect the house of the Lord. Then I called them together and stationed them at their posts. So he put them back into place. Then in verse 15, we read that the Sabbath was being neglected as well. In those days, I saw men in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys, together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. When evening shadows fell, in verse 19, on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no load could be brought in on the Sabbath day. And towards the end, in verse 28, he realizes there's more issues. He has to drive some other things out. He has to purify the priests and the Levites of everything foreign and assigned them duties each to his own task. I also made provision for contributions of wood, designated times, and for the first fruits. Remember me with favour, O my God. And there, with that prayer, there the book ends, with Nehemiah trying to make sure that the people stayed on track, that they didn't slide away or slip away from what they were meant to be doing, that they remained holy to God, remained committed, remained dedicated right to the end. And certainly Nehemiah, right to the end of his book, is trying to do that as well. It's about sticking with it and remaining faithful to God, knowing that we won't be perfect all the time, but giving our all for Him and doing our very best and staying true right to the end. Not backsliding, not becoming apathetic about it, not slipping away quietly, but sticking with it right to the very end. That's how we're to live. Well, Nehemiah makes it to the end, and he's remaining faithful and true throughout. And one of his prayers, and he is a man of prayer, one of his prayers towards the end is this: remember me, O my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. That was the heartbeat of Nehemiah's life and his prayers. And the words used for God's great love and his mercy in there is loving kindness, is a beautiful Hebrew word that's founded on a word which is chesed, a loving kindness, mercy, a love that will never fail. That's the kind of love that God has for you right to the end. Nehemiah knew that love in his life and he relied upon it all the time. And my prayer is that you know that love too, and you rely upon it each day, for God's love is so great for each one of us. Well, God bless you. Nehemiah prayed towards the end, remember me with favour, O my God. And we remember Nehemiah. We remember everything that he did in his book. We remember the lessons that we can learn from his life, and we're thankful for him. And as we go on with the Lord, may we remember the Lord's great love for each one of us. And may you know peace and grace and mercy today and forevermore. God bless you.